Hey, Lauren, welcome to this Wednesday's weekly briefing. It's always so great to have you here, take on these challenges. We are letting the rest of the Secret Powers team in. Amanda's showing up now. So Jay has grabbed his team and made them show up today
Yeah.
to get extra homework for this
So
thing.
there's the story with this is we are right in the middle of major timekeeping initiatives and tightening up the screws on our whole operation. So I was like, guys, if there's one weekly briefing you need to hear, it may be this one. So
This is the one. I love it. Hey, Amanda, good to see you.
You too.
Okay, so I'm just going to dive into it because we got the crowd here, the audience for it. What often kicks off these conversations is we're either looking at community, understanding trends that we're seeing, hearing, have our ear to the ground, kind of hearing what's coming, or one of us, advisors, consultants, recognizing something, having a conversation repeatedly with a client and saying, it'd be really nice if we could just make a video, talk about something. And this idea of tracking time, using production meetings efficiently, getting information to flow is something that, Lisa, you're dealing with on a client by client, hour by hour basis with the clients. And a lot of advising goes into really just some of the basics of the systems and routines related to production. So let's begin with what is the problem? What are the efficiencies that we're often looking for as a producer? And then we can get into how to capture them in a second. But let's just talk about the problem is.
So the problems that are top of mind for me, especially when we are gathering for something like a production meeting, are we use these meetings to kick off our week essentially, or we end the week to start the next week fresh, depending on how you have it set up. But the thing where people get it wrong are information isn't it's either out of date or not accessible or not ready or not prepared. People coming to these meetings unprepared. That's one big one, because we have a finite amount of time to get some things done and to address all of the things that need to be talked about for the week, right? That's a big one. I think, another big thing that can derail these conversations or derail progress and efficiency is going off on tangents. So not having really structured leadership of the call and structure of the call in the meeting. And so you come to talk about one thing and you end up talking about something else, and then 30 minutes or 60 minutes are gone.
So
right?
Specifically when it comes to time, it's interesting because many of us are talking about time almost repeatedly, where we might have a resource meeting with our team and we're saying, hey, in the resource meeting here, I would like to use this person for a day, that person for a few hours on this project, so on. We then take that information, walk to a person or Slack them or whatever, and say, here's what I need you to do. Can you stick with it? I only have 4 hours left on my project. Those kind of problems. The bidding process, isn't the bidding process one of the ones where we actually are asking more and more, and we often in asking about someone's a commitment, how long will it take you to get this project done? Let's tell the truth, right? On the production side, you don't believe them. Some people overestimate, some people underestimate, and you're right, just the efficiency of that information, how often we have to talk about things, how we internally calculate and so on. It's really just a burn to the system and burn to production and the entire method, the production method that we're stuck with.
Right. Exactly. And the other thing that comes up as well is, we meet for the intentions to make progress on big, important decisions, right? And when people are not in attendance or people don't have the answers, it's difficult to move the ball forward. So having the right people in the room is also something that's really important to make any kind of headway in the direction that you're trying to go.
If you have the wrong people in the room, right? What really happens in that room? You get people with just a bunch of opinions, not the right kind of knowledge.
Yeah, opinions, not the right kind of knowledge, or maybe they're, questioning, should I have this knowledge? Like, is this my responsibility? Like, whose responsibility is it? So there's a lot of like questioning of ability, who, what, why, and maybe, ideas are offered or suggestions are offered that aren't, on the right path for like what you're trying to accomplish.
Have you ever kind of been in one of those meetings where the conversation is getting kind of awkward because you need to talk about something like someone's rate or someone's performance, and you have somebody in the room that probably shouldn't be in this room, so we can't be as honest or forthcoming with that conversation? You ever been in those production situations? Yeah.
Yes, and I've seen it go like two different ways. One where it's actually like talked about and it's very uncomfortable and like feelings get hurt and all the things happen. Or it's handled a different way where like the person that is responsible for sharing, okay, what needs to be done here with the rate, with the performance or whatever, can step up and say, okay, like let's table this, let's have a conversation about this offline, and let's get back to like our agenda for today. And so there's like a time and place for some of those conversations, and maybe a big public forum is not the place to have certain sensitive conversations.
That's a very classy way of handling it. Like recognizing it comes up. Sometimes leadership really needs to do that, is say, hey, there's an elephant in the room, and let's just all be adult about it, but recognize like, hey, either let's table this conversation for now or have a separate breakout meeting for that. Ask somebody to excuse themselves or whatever you might need to. But to let a conversation continue that shouldn't continue is also something that we're kind of, yeah, it's interesting. That's having the right decision makers in the room really is the right way of doing it. I feel like a lot of businesses, owners want it to be a team effort. So there's this thought process of like, well, if you're not in the room, you'll feel left out. So I bring you in because I don't want you to have that feeling of being left out. Instead of recognizing that the efficiency of information and time and decision making kind of really has to have the right players so that we don't mix just a bunch of crazy opinions into something and actually not accomplish any real decision making when it comes to working with the team, recognizing the efforts, and then staying on track for a project and so on.
Yeah, it's like you have these meetings sometimes where like the whole company is like in there, and like that makes sense for a town hall, that doesn't necessarily make sense for like a production meeting, right? So the decision makers, the leaders need to be in that room, and then they are responsible for disseminating the information to everybody on a need to know basis, because there are some people that might need 5 minutes of that call to do their job effectively. They don't need to be in there for the whole 30 minutes or 60 minutes, however long it is.
Yeah. So let's start making some rules about this thing, or let's start talking about some solutions related to the project. I was catching on to what you're saying before, which is like, one, it's good to have a production meeting, having a time set aside specifically to discuss key elements of projects. I personally advise people to do weekly global production meetings where you'll walk through a roll up or a list of projects. I could show a roll up in a second here, but have a global agenda, and then also have separate project meetings. So maybe once a day or sometimes more frequently, say like, go have a meeting just about that one project. How who's working on it, some details or so on, but don't have a global meeting and get into the weeds and the details. That would totally just waste everyone's time and effort. But also don't expect people to just have osmosis. Like you actually have to sit down and do some very specific meetings and transfer data to people and then get data back from them accurately so you can keep on making good judgment calls for projects.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And like, that's what I would do with my team. So as an EP, we would have like our standing Monday meeting. This is like going over general company news, new updates. Maybe we're going over just like high level stuff, which I'm sure you're going to touch upon here in a second when you show the roll up, but then breaking out with like the people that are actually physically doing the work. and getting into the nitty gritty. So like the people in attendance there, maybe like your producers, maybe an account manager, just so that the core people that are either doing the work or that are client facing are all aligned and like know what's going on like day to day throughout the week.
Yeah, to me, like the true transfer of data is power, right? So we want people to be actively involved in these meetings. We want the team to be telling the truth in these meetings and have it be a safe place, but somewhere where accuracy is really important. It's really one of the hidden secrets to getting projects right is to give the room for someone to tell you the truth, regardless if it's good news or bad news. So I'll give an example of like, well, maybe financially it's a really easy one where if I feel like I'm going to tell you, Lisamarie, I've been working on this for the last 4 hours. I haven't figured it out yet. And you gave me 4 hours to work on this project. We're screwed. So I could just say to you, no, everything's fine. And then say 3 or more hours tonight after time and not charge you for my time, not tell you I really worked on it, hide it, or, come Friday, I'll do my timesheet and you'll be surprised that all the extra time I put on a project, right? So the one key factor of like, hey, make a safe place where someone can tell you the truth and turn that truth telling into a problem solving, a support. Hey, tell me the truth. I can come alongside you and help you, opposed to find that moment to use that person as a scapegoat and complain about something that just will totally destroy the team and the effort put into those resources.
Yeah, and it's also like with creating that safety, it's not only telling the truth, but it's like the timing of telling that truth and sharing that truth. So the sooner, like if you have people on your team and they're experiencing challenges, they're experiencing roadblocks, like these are things to be talking about potentially in the production meeting or in your like breakout meetings, right? But you don't want to be the one to find out by the delivery time and day that something's wrong and it's not ready and it's not done. So encouraging our people to like early and often be communicating with like progress, challenges, road bumps that they're having so that there's time to adjust it, there's time to pivot, there's time to reorient or bring in additional resources or whatever is needed so that you don't risk the chance of overbilling, over needing overages, blowing past the deadline, like all of that. So I think it really comes like it all starts with leadership and what you're communicating to your people, especially from the perspective of like, this is a safe space. People make mistakes, things come up. Like, let's just talk about it. Let's work through it together.
Yeah, and to be the right producer that says, when I did this project, I had expectations, but I could be wrong too, by the way. I put the best knowledge when I put forward, but if we're discovering something along the way, I need to know about it so I can engage the client in a solution or my creative team in the solution, and we can actually start working on this proactively. Then just putting parameters on a project that we have to admit, somewhat arbitrary at the beginning of the project, and then just cramming everybody's effort into those buckets, hoping they get it right. There's got to be an openness to it. So let's talk about the method, right? So we begin most projects with a bidding process. We have to translate that information straight to the team on a one by one basis. So I'm going to bid out a time for you. I'm going to project out that time, how many days or hours I think you should work on it. And then I think the producer's first goal is to transfer information to a person, meaning they sit down, they say, hey, I listened to you when I did the bidding process. This is what I put onto the schedule. This is what I put on the budget. I'd like you to start today. Here's the first milestone. Here's the hours available to get that work done within that milestone. And that's a one-on-one meeting so that you can get some immediate and real feedback, understand the pressure points, and start bringing that information into your personal and production decision making. That's often to me like a step one of like time management with your team is one-on-one communication with each person on the team.
Yeah, and like even like if you like it's one thing to like bid on the job, get it awarded, and then share with everybody working on it how much time they have and what the expectations are, kind of like a kickoff call. But sometimes it could even be beneficial too to loop in the subject matter experts if you don't have like that deep technical knowledge yourself, to bring them in even during the bidding phase and be like, hey, look, here's the ask. Like, what do you think it's going to take so that we're like budgeting for this appropriately? Here's what I think. This is where my head's at, but I want to bounce this off of somebody else too. So then there's buy-in way ahead of the award and an understanding of kind of like of what's coming down the pike.
Excellent. You're totally right. I almost skipped the step of like recognizing that the bidding process then gets translated to a working budget process, because you will take a bid, and if using the factors method, only take a portion of that bid to be a working budget within the splits that you have for direct costs. And that conversion requires some team effort too. So in the bidding process, to find the subject matter experts to understand it, but then retranslate that. Again, though, I think on a one-on-one basis, like getting it down to that understanding, gaining trust with your team and communicating on that. Some teams are really efficient and you can just throw that in the Slack. Others might be, a 20-minute conversation on a daily basis, depending on how difficult some items can be. Okay, so that's the first step in understanding time. I personally like the idea of giving somebody what their time limit is. It's almost like re-spending my dollars. I project out a lot of the dollars I put there, and a lot of times. So when I say, hey, you do 4 hours today, I want to get a sense of like what my budget was for the day and then get immediate feedback. And I know people use timesheet systems. Harvest is one that we've used a lot to plug into our CreOS systems. But there are other great tools of like tracking time, effort, and getting that immediate feedback of like, are people on time and making the budgets happen?
Yeah, and I think just like transparency and visibility of what everybody is doing, like once all of that is delegated and assigned, is really important too, to pair up with the time tracking. So like you see that someone puts 10 hours of time in, but the assigned, like if you're using something like Asana or something to assign tasks, you're seeing that there's like a mismatch, then there's some investigating to do and some questions to be had and conversations to be had, right?
Yeah, and conducting those conversations properly. Again, keeping it safe, keeping it understanding, and keeping it proactive, really is like the next step to the communication process. Is the project meeting. So not the production meeting where everyone's looking at the global production effort, but the project meeting, meaning that's when the team might come together, or segments of the team might come together and discuss how we're doing on this project editorially. Do we have our graphic team giving us the elements we need to for that edit process? Editor, do you have what you need to along the way? And encouraging the team to talk to each other. Hey, I'm actually running a little slow on that graphic. Can you work around that for the day? Hey, I really need that footage sooner than later. Can I prioritize your work and get A done before B and switch things out? So as we're rolling out the day, to reprioritize based on that day's needs, the amount of effort and the timing of things, and let it be a very open meeting and be flexible. Nobody should walk in that meeting super rigid, being a total dictator and not having any understanding what the effort is. It really is like that flexibility in that meeting, pivoting really quickly in that meeting is really key.
Yeah, because everybody's really working just towards the same goal. So there is no reason to be working against each other. It's working together with each other, alongside each other, in partnership with each other to get across the finish line.
Yeah, excellent. And here's the thing, like if you're the producer and you have that meeting, if something has changed and you hear a change, you should get up from that meeting immediately and go walk over to your working budget and plug in those new variables. You should just understand the impact of like, now that I heard that, does it have any impact on my expectations of the project, the changing of things, the working around of the schedule, milestones, anything along the way? And that's your first sign to say, hey, after the team meeting, now let's have leadership one-on-ones, meaning I might take the information now with you, Lisa, and say, hey, Lisa, I see these changes, and you as my creative director, I need to talk to you about this. And your ideas, they're not working out. Our team has run tests. What you storyboard isn't really there. And we pivot with that and maybe start talking about how to start managing client expectations sooner than later if we're finding issues along the way.
Exactly. And I am definitely an advocate for having those conversations with the client and leading with transparency as early and often as possible, even if it's just to say, like, they don't need to know everything that goes on behind the scenes, right? But anything that's going to affect time, anything that's going to affect budget, even if it's not 100% confirmed of it being like an unfavorable outcome, still raising the point to them and be like, look, here, we're up against this thing. This is what's going on. Here's how we're trying to solve it. And we're going to report back to you like when we have a clear picture of what's going on. I think is really important because there's nothing that a client hates more than finding out later, like after the fact. Every client's going to want to know early, or at
As
least have a
soon
heads
as
up.
possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can start engaging your clients into solving some of these big picture problems too. Hey, even if it's your fault, hey, we projected this, we storyboarded it. It actually, we've run the test. It's really not working out. Don't worry, we've come up with another solution. We'd love to discuss it with you, but we need to start recognizing that we're pivoting together as a project, and we'll still get great results, but it might not be the same thing we storyboarded. Do you need to run that up a channel of command, or what presentations do we need to put together? Should we put a pause in the project? These other things that you can do in a very proactive and still positive way before it gets off the rails, everyone hates it, and you spend all the money and we're not hitting those results. So that leadership team meeting is really removing other people and saying directly, like, as leaders, how do we want to handle the situation we have going on? Clearly, if the project's going well, we don't have to have a lot. Those are not long meetings, but it's still good to have that leadership meeting. So one-on-one meetings, project meetings, and leadership meetings on a project-by-project basis. Really great ways of doing that. And the producers should be coming into those meetings with updated actuals, updated finances, giving people an understanding of where we are in the progress. Are things okay, schedule-wise and budget-wise, as we're moving along?
Yep.
So then the next one is the production meeting. Maybe I'm going to steal this moment right now to share a roll-up, because really for me, the roll-up was like the tipping point a lot when it came to working as a producer and getting a sense of like what it takes to get projects done within a business. I'll simplify this. If anyone's seen this before, this is basically a worksheet we have called CreOS is our means creative operating system. It really is a series of spreadsheets that take the logic that we practice at RevThink, specifically the factors method of how to look at finances and projects and convert them on a project by project basis. This is a worksheet that we give out. So anybody that wants this could DM me and I'll make a copy for you. This has the instructions as well as a link to a video to show you how it works. But here is a very basic roll up. I'm going to show you one with the example, which is really a list of projects. And a production meeting, I like to have this list of projects. I want to go through this project list, project by project, active projects, and see how we're doing. And I like a 3-point agenda for this meeting: how we're doing on the project relationally with the client. So client, the second one is the creative. I often use this as an indicator. This is the job name. So how we're doing on it creatively, and then how we're doing on the cash or the profit, right? So client, creative, and cash, 3-point agenda for each line item. And we just go through it producer by producer. I personally like to mix it up so that one producer doesn't hog a third of the meeting, and the two producers or fall asleep. Like you kind of, jumble back and forth and pass along to different producers so everyone kind of stays active. But walking through it, and here again, we have to tell the truth. How are we doing on these projects? How are we doing in those 3 areas? And what information do we need to know from one another in those 3 areas? Because if my creative is suffering, maybe you as another producer, Lisa, you can give me one of your key members on a project you're working on, help me clean something up for a day or 2.
Right. Yeah. I mean, looking at this, like, truth is in the math, truth is in the data. The data is going to uncover a lot of things that may not be like on the table for discussion yet, that will then like surface to like address. So whether that's a resourcing question or that's we got to go to the client question, like this will just expose all of the things that need to be addressed to maintain a healthy, profitable project and keep everybody aligned and like just in the know of like where things are at. And so nobody's really like working in a vacuum.
Yeah, and I like to remind people that the production meeting is the producer's meeting. And what I mean by that is owners need to listen in this meeting, not talk in this meeting. If you have a team of producers, and this is where Amanda is smiling now and Jay is frowning because I just told Amanda she's running this meeting instead of Jay. Just kidding, guys. But like to get to the sense of like, hey, this is where the producers are telling us how we're doing on projects, telling us the truth. And our job is to listen through that truth and understand like what the bigger resources are creatively, over on the big scope of understanding what the client needs. Start thinking through, do we need to re-engage our team differently? Do we have to engage our client differently, the creative differently? And again, if you're doing well on project, really no issue. But let the producers talk, let them run the meeting. The rest of the team should listen. And this is one of those where the right people need to be in the room. If you're not part of a project decision making, let's not have the voice in there. So sometimes a salesperson, some companies have salespeople in there. It could be helpful. Usually it needs a separate meeting for sales. Or maybe you have creative directors if you have more than one creative director. But sometimes it's really not great to have all the creative directors in the meeting because I find that you can get into the weeds and not really stick to the agenda of the production meeting, which is really just the three areas: the creative, the client, the cash. How are we doing on those? And walking through it piece by piece, and having the problem solvers in the meeting to share with one another if their problems arise. I want to show this real quick for anyone who has not seen a roll up. You're going to notice that from left to right, we really just have the initial of the producer, the client's name, the project name, the status of it. You can see there's active, delivered, and closed. Delivered might be you delivered it, but the payments aren't all in. So these are examples of like, this is a $15,000 job. Not all the payments are in, so it's delivered, but these are actually payments are in, so these are closed. So that's where its status might be. And then I do a bid, any overages, and the project total. So I can kind of live with the variables of new money coming in. And then this is where the factors method comes in, and we're doing these splits. How much of each project needs to be set aside to run the company costs, what's allowed to run the creative costs, and then have your team use this number, this piece of the split to determine the cost to date. This is really important. Lisa, you love this too, the future estimated costs. Having the producer go, reproject, understand. I keep this up to date, making sure that we're looking at the budget and then therefore giving us an estimated profit before we finish. That's what, it's really actually kind of basic left to right. And then we just go through it top to bottom. I also like to include invoices and give some visibility to producers on how we're doing invoice-wise, because there are key moments along a project where we have to send out invoices or not. So I want to have some information there. And if you're using the full system of Creo OS, like some of you are, you know that these are somewhat automated. They're being fed into the system. So this can be a very automated process. Again, anyone who wants a copy of this is a great place to kind of just start doing that factors method and looking at a roll up. Okay, so let's
Tim,
get back to like, oh God.
I was going to bring up one thing because I've seen it kind of like presented differently in different places, you know, where I've worked over time. And I'm wondering if you can speak to, so like this is the producers meeting, they're showing all of these numbers. Any sensitivities with showing like the total allotted amount of money for the job versus the amount of money that the producers have to work with? And when it comes to like they're feeling a squeeze, they're feeling up against the budget, up against timing, and like knowing that there is profit on the table of like what can you say or speak to anybody in the room that has sensitivities with like sharing that level of detail with the numbers?
Yeah, you know, there's somewhat of a cultural decision in figuring that out. I think there is a necessary sensitivity, meaning that the people in the room should understand the big picture because they're managing it. If you think about it, like with the splits, you've just handed over 50% of the total revenue for your business to a decision maker that might not be the business owner. So they should have some understanding of like what it takes and how much is allocated to them. But there is, like, when we're calculating the creative cost versus the company cost, we might not get into all the details of what's embedded in the company, but we're telling the truth. Like, in order to run the business, a certain percentage of that project's budget has to go to business expenses, or indirect expenses is another way to think of it. And what's available to directly spend on the project, you can spend all of it. So if I allocate 55% of the company's costs to you, and you spend 54.5%, I should be totally okay with that. But know that zero is zero. So if you're looking at a negative, you actually are spending money we don't have. And the goal should be to have some profit, 2%, 3%. Some people get up to 5%, not 40%. I think that's where people do these numbers wrong, where they say, here's 100% of the budget, try to make 40% profit. That's where people think there's 30% profit. If I make 35%, it's still profit, and they don't really get that. No, you've actually burned real money we needed to run the business. So I just kind of clear the deck, tell the truth, create visibility for everybody, and I often train the team to understand what those big picture items are. I just worked with a client that wanted to be really, really sensitive, and I talked to the team. I convinced them, like, this is the right way to do it in decision making, and we've run the factors method now for 3 months. Absolute turnaround from the company, absolute turnaround of profit of the project, because everybody sees the whole picture of their project without any big secrets. And now they know, oh, that's the target I've been trying to hit all along, instead of these looser numbers, looser rates, unestablished allocation of budget, and so on. So really clear targets you can hit. That's the kind of the goal of that method.
I cannot agree more that, like, knowledge is power, because then everybody is going to have buy-in. Then everybody's going to understand what the numbers are, why, and they can advocate for those numbers and push to work with the amount of money that we have. That's the internal side. The external side, and I'm thinking about this through a live action lens, is, and maybe you can speak to this too. I don't want to derail the conversation too much, so let me know if you have to move on. Is if, like, say it's a live action shoot and the client signs off on a $300,000 budget, and production gets 50% of that budget. And when there's like an optics thing then happening, right, between what the client knows that they paid, and if they're any type of like savvy, like, they're going to have a general sense of like that. So it's one thing to have like the buy-in and the knowledge, and like equipping your people to like be as effective and efficient as possible. And then there's like the managing optics, if it ever does come up with your client, right?
Yeah, that's why, like, no clients are surprised that you're not actually paying $1,500 a day for an animator. That's the rate they're willing to accept in the procurement, and you might be paying $300 to $500 or $500 to $700, whatever that might be. They know how the system works, and they recognize the reason they're giving you a rate higher than your cost is because the difference between there is where you do pay your rent, and you do buy software, and you can pay the owner a salary, and those things that are indirectly related to that project. So the difference between a rate a client pays and the cost that actually has you put out on a person by person basis is what we're often managing. And you're right, there is some optics. I think people might be kind of nervous about the difference between a rate and a price, a rate and a cost within that system. And that's what we often help clients with and get over, is like create clear understanding of what real costs are, how to put that information together, and then know how to allocate time against it. Because that time really is what's going to burn money, anything else, more than anything else. If a client, you're hitting the client's projects on time and on budget from what they've agreed to, often the conversation is very easy for them to keep on coming back and pay whatever price you ask for. It really is your team understanding, like, this is actually how it works. And there might be some immaturity of not understanding how it works. Just teach the team, empower them with that knowledge. That's the right way to go about it. That was a good question, by the way. I'm sure other people have questions too, but that was a good question. Let's go back to the final step of of the time tracking and time processing thing here, because the last is the reporting. And I think there's a lot of hangups when it comes to reporting, because the first thing that people hear when I say reporting is timesheets, and they go, "Oh, people are not going to do timesheets around here." It's kind of funny how allergic we are to timesheets, because it feels like there is here's what my sense is. It's like there's a financial accountability to my creative mind, and my creative mind has no limits. So why should I put financial limits on my creative or something like that? So that's one of the first pushbacks I get on timesheet. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Any creative director is going to give you an answer like that. Like, I can't just like give you an idea on the spot. I need time for my mind to wander. I need time to research. I need time to get inspired, So yeah, that's I all the time.
And they want to tell me over and over again and make up all these reasons of like where their time goes or how we limit. So one thing I want people to hear when I say a time conversion of projects is I'm not always talking about timesheets. Timesheets are a great tool, and some cultures very easily can work with timesheets. It's great if you can. It creates expectations. It's actually very fair for an employee to tell you how much effort they put into this project. It's really good for you as a business owner to know how much effort you've given a client, and knowing where you've met their need in time or you need to change. But we're not always stuck with timesheets. Another way of working with time is actually a schedule. So instead of me asking you, how much did you work on this project yesterday? I can say, here's how much time I want you to work on it today. So my allocation of your time on it today, of saying I want you to work on it for 6 hours, I can go into a budget tracking system and say, Lisamarie, 6 hours today, because I allocated that to you, instead of asking you after the fact and wondering if you hit that mark. And I find that one pivot is often a game changer, because what you're almost saying is I'm giving you permission to use these many hours any way you want to, opposed to, did you meet the need I gave you after the fact? Because it's almost too late after the fact anyways. If you overspent yesterday, what am I going to do about it? But if I give you expectations today, you and I can kind of collaborate.
Yeah. And like that alone, just like a teeny tiny tweak in how you're talking about and thinking about time is really the difference between falling into the trap of micromanaging versus empowering. And so like what you just described, you're empowering the person to manage their time or use that amount of time versus like checking in. Did you do this? Did you do this? How much progress did you make? All of that. Because then that could take a toll on the relationship, honestly, and the output and the productivity when it's the other way around.
And you just became the number one collaborator because you actually are financing their creative project. Hey, I'll give you $15,000 today worth of time. You can go spend it any way you want to. We have to get the job done together, and you're working together as a team. You're putting things together. You're working the plan and building the plan with them. So that is another way of thinking about time. You just have to figure out what system works for you culturally. Again, I know some places where timesheets are perfectly acceptable. They're actually people really love them. Accountability is really great that way. And other people where it's really great to have a resource meeting, really great to have almost like a work order system where you're actually allocating work and describing ahead of time and being very proactive that way. Whatever works with you, those are the two ways of kind of putting time in there. And that management of having a producer team coming alongside the creative and the talent is really great. Okay, I feel like we covered it. Did I miss anything that you were thinking ahead of time of what would be tricks for time and time management, controlling costs and so on a project?
Well, I mean, I think just like holistically, and this goes for any type of meeting that you have, production meeting, project meeting, producers meet, like all of the meetings, like coming to each of these with an intention, knowing what you want to accomplish, and like really being a good steward of that time. That takes leadership to wrangle the time and to make sure that you stay on task and stay focused. The other thing, like obviously we mentioned this a couple times already, like having that agenda, like that assists with that, right? And then the only other thing that I would say is just like a good bookend, and just like honestly a standard practice is making sure at the end of every meeting you're recapping, okay, here's what we discussed, here are the next steps, here's who's responsible for doing what, and when you need to report back on these things, right? There's that. And then like just keeping a running list of parking lot items. So things that you may have had an intention to talk about, but maybe there are other things that took priority for the time that you had that you need to revisit at a later date that maybe isn't as time sensitive, or like whatever it is.
I love that, because then you just basically keep engagement going. They're about ready to kick me out of the lobby I'm sitting in, right? Yeah. They're going to turn off the lights on me. And they're giving me fair warning. They're like, the restaurant is closed. You have to now leave. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think to indicate to your team, hey, I'm a team member. I'm an open door. Let's have conversations. Be very communicative that way. And then be really clear of like what those expectations are. Like clarity is kind, right? So if you have expectations and you roadmap something, let's not just document it to hold people accountable. Let's document it so that there is expectation. It's set as clearly as possible, and just add fairness to the team, and build a plan together. Okay, I gotta get going, don't I? I can talk about this all night or whatever. Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Okay, well, I do have to wrap up because they're literally throwing me out of this restaurant. But Lisa, thank you so much for inspiring this conversation and thinking this stuff through. Jay, I saw many of your questions. I think we answered most of them because I was kind of chiming in as you were putting them out there. But if you're having more questions or anyone having more insights, please use the community discussion forum, post comments in the replay, what have you, and we can answer them there. Lisa is on community. You can DM her directly. You can DM me directly. And if you want a copy of the dashboard I showed you, the CreaOS Lite dashboard, just send me an email, tim@revthink.com, ask for the CreaOS roll up, and I'll make a copy for you so you can get your hands on that and watch that video. Thank you again, Lisa. Thank you all for being here. It's really great to have this conversation, and we'll see you next week on the weekly briefing. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.